to Daily News Simplified. Here we take important articles from The Hindu and curated as per the demand of UPSC Civil Services Examination. The topics for today's discussion are mentioned over your screen. So let's begin our session. Hello aspirants, there is an important announcement. As we all know that choosing optional is the most critical decision we make in the UPSC preparation. So, to enable the students to make an informed decision in this regard and experience the teaching style and pedagogy of our exceptional optional faculty, Rao's IS is allowing all aspirants to experience the optional classes which are to be conducted on 6th, 9th and 10th of October. So you can register for the same using the link in the description box. The first topic of today's discussion is based on this article which appeared on the page number 7 of The Hindu. The article says that from women's reservation to gender equality. So if we talk about gender equality, it is the 5th Sustainable Development Goal recognized by United Nations. And in Indian context, if we talk about gender equality, it can be the equality to women as par with men along the 3 domains. These domains are equality in the social domains, which can be majorly gauged by the indicators like health and education, equality in the economic domain, and equality in the political domains. So this article starts from the fact that last week the Parliament has passed the Women's Reservation Bill, which aims to provide 1/3 reservation to women in the Lok Sabha and legislative assemblies. So this can be seen as a tool of political empowerment to women. So this representation of women to elected bodies can be seen in the larger context of female labor force participation in India. We all know that the female labor force participation in India is very low. An important aspect of gender equality is economic empowerment. And this economic empowerment will only happen by transition from care economy to monetized economy. So this article is important for our GS paper 1 society under the syllabus head role of women and women's organization. This is also important for our GS paper 2 social justice under the syllabus head issues relating to the development and management of social sector or services relating to health, education and human resources. This topic is also important for our GS paper 3 economy under the syllabus head inclusive growth and issues arising from it. So for today's discussion, we will see what are the contemporary economic issues faced by women in India. So we will be seeing these issues which are low female labor force participation rate, unpaid care work, gender inequalities in employment and gender poverty. We will discuss gender responsive budgeting in brief and then we will see a way forward. Recently, in the year 2023, we saw this question in GS paper 3, distinguish between care economy and monetized economy and how can care economy be brought into monetized economy through women empowerment. In the year 2019, we saw this question in GS paper 1 which asked the continued challenges for women in India against time and space. And in the year 2016, in GS paper 3, we saw this question which was women empowerment in India needs gender budgeting. What are the requirements and status of gender budgeting in the Indian context? So these are some of the questions which were asked. So these are some of the questions asked by UPSC related to these themes. So let's start our discussion by focusing on the contemporary economic issues faced by women in India. There is a phrase missing women which was coined by Amartya Sen regarding his observation that in various parts of the world, especially in the developing countries like India and China, the ratio of women to men is considerably low in various domains like social, political and economic domain. So for India, this particularly means that women in India lags behind men in various social indicators like health and education and also in terms of economic and political opportunities and participation. So this disparity is reflected by some stats such as literacy rate. The literacy rate for males in India is around 85% and for females it is 77%. The participation in women in labor force is significantly low as compared to the males. So as per the data of Periodic Labor Force Survey of 2021-2022, in the age group of 15 to 29 years, only 32.8% of females were a part of India's labor force as compared to 77.2% of males. And if we talk about political representation, there is a disproportionate number of women in decision making bodies. In the present 17th Lok Sabha, out of 545 members, just 14.4% of them are women. A data of 2020 shows that out of total central government employees in India, only 13% of them are women. And a data of 2022 shows that there are only 14% of women secretaries in Indian administrative service. Hence, gender inequality of any form is a threat to the balanced development of the country. Now let's discuss the low female labor participation rate in India. The labor force participation rate is defined as the set of the population above the age of 15, generally in the working age of 16 to 64 years, who are either currently employed or they are seeking employment. So in general, during the process of economic development, the labor force participation rate shows a U-shaped relationship. When there is a poor economic development, the women's labor force participation is relatively high, as more number of women participate in labor in order to meet their immediate economic needs. However, with increased economic development, women's labor force participation rate declines. This is due to the expansion of markets and a shift from farm activities to factory work. So because of this increased economic development, urbanization and social barriers against women, the women's labor force participation rate decreases. But as the economy progresses further, the women's education level rises and more women start to work in white collar jobs, and because of which the women's labor force participation rate increases. Hence we can say that female labor force participation rate has a U-shaped relationship with economic development. But in India, we see a stark contrast with this behavior. Despite the increased education or literacy level in women and despite the drop in the fertility rate, the labor force participation rate in females in India is declining. So as per the data by World Bank, the female participation in the labor force in India has declined over 2 decades. This female labor participation rate in India, which was around 32% in the year 2005, has declined to 19% in the year 2021. And this participation rate is even lower than the world average of 25%. So in this indicator, India is behind the countries like US, Sweden, and even behind the countries like China, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. So let us see what are the reasons of this declining female labor force participation rate in India. So the first factor is rise in the family income. With the rise in the family income, the families or the household are less reliant on a second income. So as per the cultural norms of the country or as per the division of labor in the country, when the need of a second income reduces, it is generally the women who leave their employment and they devote themselves to the domestic household chores. So we can say that this patriarchal division of labor is also responsible for declining female labor force participation, as men are the primary breadwinners in Indian society. Another factor is the rise of nuclear families. So with the rise in nuclear families, the primary responsibility for the child care support is with the women of the family, as there is no support from the elderly family members. And this childcare responsibility impacts the career prospect of a woman. Another issue is rise in higher education. So in India, especially in the last 5 years, the enrollment of women in the higher education and research and development field has increased. And because of which, at the time being, they are not able to contribute as a labor force. Another factor is that with the rise in higher education among women, there is a demand for more white-collar jobs. But this demand for white-collar jobs is unmet due to the jobless growth of Indian economy. Another factor is lack of suitable working conditions. So working women in India can face several challenges, such as long work hours in their workplaces, lack of crash facilities in their workplaces, and glass ceiling or income disparities to women. So because of these factors, women cannot balance their household responsibilities and are more likely to quit their employment. And this is also responsible for a declining female labor force participation rate. Another factor is agrarian crisis. So because of certain crises in the agriculture sector and other agricultural challenges are pushing women out of agricultural workforce. and their participation as an agricultural workforce is decreasing. Another factor is lack of connectivity, especially in the rural areas. So this lack of connectivity or transport restrict women in seeking non-agricultural employability in neighboring places or neighboring towns. And hence, this lack of rural connectivity restricts their economic mobility. And finally, there is a decline in labor-intensive manufacturing industries. For example, the MSME sector in India is underperforming, or it is not creating enough jobs these days. And this has impacted the employment creation opportunities which this sector earlier created. And overall in the country, the growth of manufacturing sector has declined. And because of which, the labor-intensive jobs in the sectors such as leather, textiles, or other MSMEs have decreased. And since women are more hit by any slowdown in the economic productivity, hence this contributes to the declining female labor force participation rate. Now let's see another dimension, which is the unpaid care work. Unpaid care work is all unpaid services provided within a household to all its members. This can include the care for persons, household work, or any voluntary community work. So such kind of activities are considered as work because if any third person was employed to do such services, that person would have to be paid. But in India, generally this unpaid care work is done by women. So let's see what is the nature of this unpaid care work. The nature of this work is that it will emphasize care over profit. In India, the majority of unpaid care work is done by the housewife, who focus on providing services and family care related to the sector like education, health, and nursing services. So if we talk about value measurement, the value is not driven by monetary transaction. Rather, it focuses on well-being or quality of life. And if we talk about the contribution of unpaid care work to the GDP, so in India, this is mostly unaccounted. So these are the stats of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. As per the ministry, women spend 299 minutes, which roughly is around 5 hours, on unpaid domestic services for their household members. And also women spend more than 2 hours on unpaid caregiving services for the household members. The issue is that in India, this unpaid care work is not measured. That is, the non-inclusion of unpaid care work in the country's GDP makes it invisible and undervalued. Another economic challenges faced by women is gender inequalities in employment. Even when women are employed, they face certain kind of gender inequalities. The first is occupational segregation. So in the Indian economy generally, men and women are segregated in different types of job roles based on the gender stereotypes, and because of which traditionally the women in India are confined into informal sector. They are majorly employed in the low paid jobs or in the care jobs such as nursing, teaching, or other kind of such jobs. And this gender inequalities in employment is also reflected in the wage gap or in the income disparity in India. And this wage gap is not just present in the informal sector, but this is also present in the formal sector. For example, in the IT sector itself, there is a sharp pay gap of 26% in the favor of men. And also, the gender inequalities in employment arise from the fact that due to lower levels of education or the lower skills level in women, and also due to domestic obligations, they are often employed in the part-time work. And now let's talk about gender poverty. So this concept of gender poverty means that the burden of poverty is relatively more on women as compared to men. And this is because of the multiple reasons such as the existing pay gap between men and women, the prevalence of unpaid care work which is majorly done by women, majority of Indian women are employed in the informal sector, and also because women have lower ownership of assets, for example lower ownership of land. And further, the poverty is inherently gendered in old age. So there is an article in the page number 12 of today's The Hindu. It is a report by United Nations Population Fund. So as per this article, the share of population over the age of 60 is projected to increase in India from 10.5% in 2022 to 20.8% in 2050. So by the end of the century, the elderly will form over 36% of total population of the country. So along with other data, this article also says that the poverty is inherently gendered in the old age. That is, the elderly women are more likely to be poor than elderly men. So this poverty is inherently gendered in old age when older women are more likely to be widowed, living alone with no income or with fewer assets, fully dependent on the family for support. So this supports the existence of gender poverty. Now, having seen the challenges existing at the multiple levels, let us see what is the way forward in this regard. So the first measure is to improve the educational outcome, especially for women. That is, to increase their literacy rate, to increase their gross enrollment ratio, to prevent their dropout rate, especially in the higher education, and to increase the participation of women in STEM and research and development. Another measure is by focusing on skill development. So there should be skill training of women to transition them from care economy to the monetized economy. More emphasis should be given to vocational education, and there should be more opportunities for internship or apprentice. Another measure is by improving the financial inclusion of women. That is, by improving the access of women or women entrepreneurs to financial services. Another measure can be by increasing the entrepreneurship opportunities to the women. Apart from other sectors, women can be encouraged to take up entrepreneurship opportunities in the care economy. For example, they can be encouraged to set up daycare centers, crash facilities, or other nursing facilities at their homes, which could be financially rewarding to them. Apart from this, women can be encouraged to form self-help groups, and for this they can be facilitated policy support and financial services. And one such example of a self-help group in sustaining income is Kudambashri program in Kerala. Another measure is pay parity and flexible work arrangement. The existing wage gap in the country should be reduced, so more focus should be on the initiatives that ensure equal pay for equal job. For it, India has an Equal Remuneration Act, which mandates equal pay for men and women. So there can be effective implementation of such acts. And also there should be focus on providing flexible work arrangement like work from home. And this can enable women to balance workplace and their household responsibilities. Also, there can be crash facilities in the workplaces. Another measure is by effective policy support by the government. Though various welfare initiatives for women exist in the country, the need of the hour is effective implementation of these policies. For example, the recent amendment to the Maternity Benefit Act in India extended the paid maternity leave to women to 26 weeks. And also, India has POSH Act, which is Prevention of Sexual Harassment at the Workplaces Act. This is to prevent sexual harassment of women and to provide them a safer workplace environment. Also, the government needs to increase the allocation in gender responsive budgeting. So now let's quickly see what is gender responsive budgeting. So we all know that government presents a budget in the month of February annually. Now gender responsive budgeting is to apply a gender lens to this formulation of government programs or to the formulation of welfare schemes. That is, this is the use of fiscal policies or public financial management tools to promote gender equality. So in simple words, we can say that any gender responsive budget analyzes how the budget is going to address the concerns of women. In India, the practice of gender responsive budgeting began in the year 2005-2006. It was to translate the gender commitments into budgetary commitments. So since this year, the Ministry of Finance has been publishing gender budget statements along with the union budget. So for this year 2023-24, this gender budget was more than 2 lakh crores. Or in terms of GDP, if we say, this was around 1% of India's GDP or around 5% of government's total expenditure. So this gender budgeting consists of two parts. The part A comprises of those women-specific schemes with 100% allocation. And there is a part B which comprises allocation for those schemes which have at least 30% allocation relating to women. Presently, this gender budgeting is about 1% of India's GDP. So government needs to increase this allocation in gender responsive budgeting to contribute more towards women-specific schemes. Another measure is technological solutions or even by infrastructural development. So, the government should focus on technological innovations or increase investment in infrastructure such as improved electrification, improved access to water, or increased mobility or transport facility, such that women can reduce their time consumed in care work and can dedicate more time towards employment. And finally, we can say that there is a need to improve social awareness. One such example can be by defeminizing caregiving, that is, by breaking the stereotypes or gender role associated with caregiving. So, these all measures are necessary for inclusive development of women and to promote gender equality. And only by all these measures and active policy support from the government, India can shift its focus from women's development to a women led development. The next topic for today's discussion is based on this article, which appeared on the Science and Technology page of The Hindu. Now, the context of this article is that quantum computing has become increasingly popular, and this technology promises more speed and more efficient problem solving abilities, and it challenges the boundaries set by classical or conventional computing. So, in this article, we will be seeing the basics of quantum computing and quantum computers, which can be important for your prelims examination. So this topic is important for our GS paper 3 Science and Technology. Under the syllabus head Awareness in the field of IT, space, computers, among others. In the year 2022, we found a question on this theme, which was a quite simple question regarding in which context the term qubit is mentioned. So let's understand what is quantum technology. So quantum technology is a field of physics and engineering that applies the principles of quantum mechanics. And what is quantum mechanics? It is a branch of physics that deals with the behavior of matter or energy at the microscopic scales. So at the microscopic scale or at the scale of atoms, the laws of classical physics or the laws of Newtonian physics do not apply. So quantum computers are one of the applications of quantum technology. We live in the era where we have supercomputers. Now, despite having supercomputers, why are we moving towards quantum computers? This is because any classical computer and even a supercomputer is reliant on 20th century transistors. In other words, we can say that the working of classical computers is based on bits. Bits are nothing but transistors. So what is a bit? Bit is the smallest unit of data a classical computer can store. And a bit in a classical computer can only be in two states. That is, in a 0 state or in a 1 state. This is because any transistor can exist in only two states. Either an on state, which is represented by 1, or an off state, which is represented by 0. So if we talk about scalability, for an example, let's consider if we add 50 bits to the processing power of a computer, the processing power of that computer will only increase by 50 units. That is, more the number of bits, more is the processing power of any classical computer. So this is how a classical computer operates. But now let's see what is the difference between a classical computer and a quantum computer. We already saw that quantum computer runs on the laws of quantum physics. Now, as the basic unit of operation in a classical computer was bit, in quantum computer it is qubit. Qubits, which are the fundamental unit of information in quantum computing, qubits can be made from trapped ions, photons, atoms, electrons or protons. So as we saw that bits can exist in two states, either 0 or 1, but qubits can exist in three states. It is either 0 or 1. Also, there is an undefined intermediate state in the between. That is, apart from acquiring the definite value of 0 and 1, so apart from having a definite value, say either 0 or 1, a qubit can also be a certain percent of 0 or 1. For example, any qubit can be 20% 0 and 80% 1. So this phenomena is referred to as superposition. So because of this phenomena called superposition, a qubit can simultaneously exist in more than one places or more than one state. So as qubits exhibit this property of superposition, they are able to perform multiple functions simultaneously. And as a result, they are faster than traditional computers. Earlier we saw that bits had a linear scalability. But if we talk about the scalability of qubits, their scalability is represented by the formula 2 raised to power n, where n is the number of qubits. That is, a 1 qubit quantum computer can perform 2 computations. Similarly, a 10 qubit quantum computer can perform 2 raised to power 10 computations. So this superposition gives enormous computing power to quantum computers. So what is quantum supremacy? It is the point when a quantum computer can complete any mathematical calculation that is beyond the reach of even the most powerful supercomputer. So in the year 2019, Google had claimed that its quantum computer Sycamore had achieved quantum supremacy as it solved the mathematical problem in 200 seconds. And if we compare this to the fastest supercomputer on Earth, this supercomputer would have taken around 1000 years to solve this problem. So this point or this phenomena is known as quantum supremacy. Hence, quantum computers are expected to solve complex problems which are beyond the scope of supercomputers, and this could help in making new discoveries in the field of healthcare, energy, environmental systems, artificial intelligence, smart materials and beyond. So recently, in April 2023, the central government approved National Quantum Mission with an estimate of more than 6,000 crores for 8 years. So under this mission, India will aim to develop a 20 to 50 qubit quantum computer in the course of 8 years. And under this mission, India also aims to develop quantum communication over a distance of 2000 kilometers in the next 3 years. So the next topic for today's discussion is based on this article which appeared on the page number 6 of The Hindu. The context of this article is that recently the NASA's OSIRIS-REx mission has ended with the return of regolith or a space sample from the primordial asteroid Bennu. So for UPSC examination, this article is important for prelims under space missions. And this can also be important for your mains examination for GS Paper 3 Science and Technology under the syllabus head Awareness in the Field of Space. UPSC in the previous years has asked questions regarding the space missions and spacecrafts. As in year 2014, we found this question which was regarding the spacecraft and their purpose. The spacecraft mentioned here are Cassini-Huygens, Messenger and Voyager. Also in the year 2020, we found this question on spacecraft Evolved LISA. Now let's understand about this OSIRIS-REx mission of NASA. OSIRIS-REx stands for Origins, Spectral Interpretation, Resource Identification and Security, Regolith Explorer. So this was a dual objective mission by NASA which was launched in the year 2016. The objectives of this mission were to reach and study asteroid Bennu, which is a carbon-rich near-Earth asteroid. So the second objective was to return to the Earth with a sample of this asteroid's regolith or soil for a detailed analysis in 2023. So finally, this mission has been culminated as this spacecraft has brought about 250 grams of regolith or soil samples from this asteroid. Bennu is a small asteroid with a depth of 500 meters, and this is about 4.5 billion years old. The asteroid is a near-Earth object. So what are near-Earth object? Near-Earth object is any asteroid or comet which has its orbit closer to the orbit of Earth. So the distance between Sun and Earth is known as 1 astronomical unit. This is approximately 93 million miles. Any near-Earth object is any asteroid or comet which is at a distance of less than 1.3 astronomical unit. So these near-Earth objects are a potential threat to Earth. So in this diagram, we can see the orbits of Earth and Bennu. Now, why was this asteroid chosen? This is because it fits in 3 criteria. The first criteria is accessibility. This is because scientists needed an asteroid that was near to the Earth and that could be easily traveled to retrieve the sample from the asteroid and return to the Earth. And this all too within a frame of few years. This mission was launched in the year 2016 and the mission is successfully completed in the year 2023. Another criteria was the size of the asteroid and its composition. Since it is a primordial asteroid, that is, it formed when our solar system formed 4.5 billion years ago. So, the significance of this mission is that by analyzing the soil sample of this asteroid, scientists can reveal clues about the birth of our solar system. And this can also give clues to how the life on Earth originated. It is theorized that this asteroid may have some chemical composition or it may have some prebiotic ingredients for life. Hence, the analysis of this soil sample can give some important clues to the scientists. The final topic for today is based on this news article which appeared in the page number 4 of The Hindu. The context of this article is that Bihar is all set to have a second tiger reserve in the Kaimur district of Bihar. And for the establishment of this tiger reserve in the state, NTCA, which is National Tiger Conservation Authority, has given in principle approval. Presently, there is one tiger reserve in Bihar, which is Balmiki National Park. So this Kaimur Wildlife Sanctuary is set to be elevated as Kaimur Tiger Reserve by the end of this year or by early 2024. So the reason why this wildlife sanctuary is being made a tiger reserve is that the Balmiki National Park has reached its capacity to manage the tigers. Now for our UPSC examination, this information can be important in prelims. Under the syllabus head, important protected areas. Now let's see a few facts about Kaimur Wildlife Sanctuary. Kaimur Wildlife Sanctuary is the largest wildlife sanctuary in Bihar. The wildlife sanctuary is located in the Kaimur Range Hills. Kaimur Range is an eastward extension of the Vindhyan Range, and this Kaimur Hill Range is extended in the state of Madhya Pradesh and that of Bihar. So the topography of this wildlife sanctuary consists of deep valleys, which are locally known as khoras, and high hills. And some other facts regarding this wildlife sanctuary is that Rohtashgarh Fort and Shergarh Fort are two forts which are located in the forest of this wildlife sanctuary. In this forest, there are numerous megaliths, and also there are rock paintings of prehistoric age and stone inscriptions. And if we talk about the flora, the major forest type in this wildlife sanctuary is tropical dry mixed deciduous forest. And the important fauna found here is leopard, Indian pangolin, porcupine, sloth bear, among others. Tiger reserves are notified by the state governments as per the provisions of the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. So under the section of Wildlife Protection Act 1972, a proposal is obtained from the state, or a state can float a proposal to the NTCA, and after due diligence, a proposal in this regard can be recommended by NTCA. And following the approval by NTCA, the state government notifies the area as a tiger reserve. So that's all for today's discussion. Stay connected for more video updates.